Hello everyone. So I hope y'all are having a great day so far. Yesterday we talked about factoring with two terms. So factoring binomials. Today we'll be looking at factoring with three terms. So that is factoring with trinomials. Okay. All right. So the very first thing I want y'all to do, this is the PDF attached to your Schoology page. It's called Factoring with Three Terms. So the very first thing I want you to do when you have this pulled up is go ahead and try to list out the factors for each one of these numbers. So list all the factors for 20, all the factors for 17, and then all the factors for 32. So go ahead and try to do that on your own. Remember how we did that yesterday? It's just you could just go through and see what numbers multiply together to get 20 or 17 or 32 and list them out. Okay, so work on that on your own and then come back to this video and we will check it together.
Yeah, so there's one of them that gave the piece 2 points to triangle and you have to find so you have to find the midpoint and you have to find the person with the line with your done yeah. It'd be a little difficult. So what I do is I mean one of the questions they just have to find the person with the line. Yes.
All right, so here is all of the factors listed out for these three numbers. So as you can see on 20, that one was pretty easy to do because we all know kind of already what numbers go into 20. 17, it may have taken you a minute to think about it, but 17 is a prime number, right? So a prime number means that we can only multiply the only factors from that number that can we get back to that number is 1 in itself, 17. So those are the only factors of 17. None other numbers will work for that. And then 32 has, again, a good list of factors that might have taken you a little bit more than what we got for 20 to figure that out. But that is just us practicing just factoring with numbers from that we use all the time, right? Because we're going to be using that a little bit more today. All right, so let's go ahead and move on in our worksheet. So next after that, you see we have this little fill in the blank section. So what we're going to do here is we're kind of starting our checklist for these steps of solving a polynomial. So I told y'all that we're going to go over a bunch of different methods, and which method you use depends on how many terms that the polynomial has, right? So I said the number one thing that we're always going to do, no matter how many terms it has, is check for a greatest common factor. So for greatest common factor, I'm just going to write GCF. And you can do that too, because we'll know what you're talking about, because greatest common factor is a really long thing to write. So you can just write GCF. Okay, and then number two, the next thing we're going to do is if the polynomial has two terms, we're going to factor with, and then here's where we're going to list the methods we learned yesterday. So if you'll remember, for binomials or a polynomial that has two terms, we talked about three different methods yesterday. So the first one we talked about was difference of squares. Okay, and then we talked about difference of cubes. And also sum of cubes. Okay, those are our three methods that we went over yesterday that dealt with two terms. Now today we're moving on to three terms, so we're going to learn 3 new methods to go with 3 terms, okay? So the first one we're going to be looking at is, does it have really a specific name? But I'm just going to call it multiply this and add that, and I'll explain why in a little bit. Okay, and then that next one we're going to talk about is called the gross product method. Okay, and then our last one we're going to talk about is called the bottoms up method. Okay, so, and then as we go through, we can begin to see like why they are actually called that, right? So make sure you have all of that written down, okay, and then we're going to start moving on to learning these methods. All right, so let's scroll down. So first, we're going to be looking at using that first method we wrote down, which was I called like the multiply to this and add to that. So this one is specifically for a trinomial that has a leading coefficient of 1. So how we can tell that is we're going to look at that first term. So right here, that would be the x squared. So that would be the x squared, and we want to look at the coefficient. And remember, we talked about if we don't see any coefficient, any number before the variable, that means that the coefficient is an invisible 1. So this one does have a coefficient of 1. Okay, so the only method we're going to use for a coefficient of 1 trinomial is this method we're going to do right now. The other two, gross product and bottoms up, are going to be for trinomials with a coefficient that's not 1. Okay, and we will go over why in just a second. But let's get through this one first, and then we can start looking at coefficients other than 1. All right, so remember the very first thing we want to do on any of these factoring is check for a greatest common factor. So let's check our variables first. So I only see x, but we don't have an x in every term. That last term is just a constant, so we can't take out a variable. Okay, what about our coefficients? So that first one only has a coefficient of 1, right? Technically, we could take out a 1 out of everything, but it would stay the exact same. So for this situation, there is not going to be a greatest common factor, okay? All right, so now we can move on to factoring. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to list all the factors for the last term of this trinomial. So the last term is the one usually without a variable on it. So the last term is -12, okay? So especially this one has a negative, right? Those numbers at the top did not have a negative, but we want to consider that when we're listing these factors. So in order for us to get a negative product when we're multiplying, we have to multiply a positive number and a negative number together. So when each of these sets that we write down, we have to have at least one negative number. So let's think, what numbers can we multiply to get to 12? We can have 1 and 12. We can have 2 and 6. We can have 4 and 3. Okay. So now let's go back and look at, we need to make in those sets one number be negative. So this one we could have 1 and -12. This one we could have 2 and -6. This one we could have 4 and -3. Okay, but we also need to flip it the other way around. So we could also have -1 and 12. We could have -2 and 6. And we could also have -4 and 3. Okay, so the reason I wrote those sets again, but in a different way, is because for example, in that 1-12 set, the 12 doesn't have to be negative. It just has to be one of those numbers. So it could be the 1 or the 12 that's negative, okay? So those are all the factors for -12, okay? And you'll see why we wrote all of them. Right now, we're going to determine which factor set we're going to use next. So how we determine that is we're going to look at all of our sets that we've written down, and see of these sets which one the numbers add up to be the middle term. Our middle coefficient is 4 right here. So which of these sets do the numbers add up to be positive 4? Okay, so that's how we determine which factor set to use. So I'm going to make a note of that. So y'all can make a note on your paper is the factor set that adds to be the middle coefficient. Okay. All right, so let's look at our factor sets that we listed and see of which of those that would become positive 4. So 1 minus 12, no, that's going to be negative 11, so that one is not going to work. Okay, 2, negative 6, that would be negative 4, so it's close, but still not positive 4, so not that one. Okay, 4 minus 3, that's just going to be 1, so not that one either. Negative 1 plus 12, that's going to be positive 11, still not that. Okay, and then negative 2 plus 6, that is positive 4, so let's box that one in and check the last one. Negative 4 plus 3, that's negative 1, so not that one. So the set that we're going to be using is that negative 2 and 6. Okay, so if y'all want to write that down here, that's the set we're going to be using. Okay, so make sure you have that written down, and I'm going to scroll down a little bit. All right, so we're using that negative 2 and 6. Okay, the reason why we're picking a set to use is that is going to end up being basically what our factors are. Okay, so since we didn't have a greatest common factor to take out, we just need to write 2 binomials like that, okay? And so for each one of those, we're going to have an x in it, since that was our only variable, okay? And then we had a negative 2, so I'm just going to write minus 2 right here. The reason that it's minus is because that 2 is negative, so that changes our sign to be a minus. And then for the second one, we had a positive 6, so I'm going to write plus 6, okay? So we can check that by multiplying, right, which is the opposite of factoring. So let's check our work. Let's multiply these factors and see if it comes back to be our original polynomial that we had. So let's do the FOIL method, do it really quick. So we're going to multiply the first term, so x times x, it's x squared. Okay, we're going to multiply the outside terms, which is x times 6. So plus 6x, multiply the inside terms, negative 2 times x is negative 2x. And then the last term, so negative 2 times 6, which is negative 12. Okay, and then we can combine those two inside terms, so we have x squared plus 4x minus 12, and that does match to be our original polynomial. So those are our factors, x minus 2 times x plus 6 for our trinomial that we had, okay? So here's a second example that is going to match this. So remember, our first step that we want to do is see if there's a greatest common factor, okay? And then follow the same steps for this example, see if you can do it on your own, and then we will come back and check it. All right, so let's look at this example right here. Okay, so remember the very first thing we need to do is check for that greatest common factor. Right away, I can see that all of these terms can be divided by 2, right? Even the first one, which is 2. So if we take a 2 out of everything, then we're going to be left with x squared plus 5x minus 6. Okay, so that is our trinomial that we'll be working with after we took out the greatest common factor. So when you first looked at this, you might have thought, well, this doesn't have a leading coefficient of 1. It's 2, right? But after we took out that greatest common factor, we are left with a leading coefficient of 1, which is why we can use this method. Okay. All right, so the first thing we need to do is list all the factors for -6. So we could have 1 and 6. Let's go ahead and add our negative. We could have 1 and -6. We could have 2 and -3. We could have -2 and 3. And we could have -1 and 6. Okay. So those are all of our possible factors for that. Now we need to see which of those adds to be our middle coefficient, which is +5. Okay, so +5, we're looking for that. So let's check the first one. 1 minus 6, that's going to be -5. So close, but not that one. Okay. 2 minus 3, that's going to be -1. So not that one either. -2 plus 3, that's +1. So not that one either. And then the last one, -1 plus 6, does equal +5. So we're going to be using that set, okay? All right. Now remember, our greatest common factor that we took out was 2, right? So we need to write that at the beginning because we factored that out. That's going to go at the beginning, and then we're going to have our 2 binomials, okay, and x in each one. All right, and then in our first binomial, we're going to have that -1, so it's going to be x minus 1. And then the second one, we're going to have the +6, so x plus 6. And then if you want, you could check your work just by multiplying like we were practicing on Friday, and see if it matches. That doesn't hurt to do, okay? But that is our final answer. All right, awesome. So now we're going to move on to looking at how we factor a trinomial that has a leading coefficient other than 1. Okay, so let's look at, we have 2 different ones. We have gross product, and then we have bottoms up right here. So we have 6x squared plus 7x minus 5. Okay, so I'm going to go through the steps of how we do each of these, and I'll probably make a little note out to the side in words of what we're doing for each one. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to multiply the leading coefficient, which is 6 here, by the last term, which is -5. Okay, so we're going to multiply, or actually we're not doing the -5, just the 5. Okay, so multiplying those two together. So we're going to have 6 times 5, which is going to be 30. Okay, so what we want to do with that is, or I forgot that. There we go. That should be right. Okay, so what we're going to do next is try to come up with those factors for this 30 again. So just like we were doing before, we're going to come up with a list of factors. So if you want, you can do that on your own, okay? And I'll be writing it on the screen right here. Okay, so here are the factors listed out for -30. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at which of those sets add up to be our middle coefficient, just like we did last time. So that would be +7 here. So we're going to look at which of those factor sets add to be +7. Okay, so not this one, right? That one either. So what about 3 minus 10? That's close. That's -7. So Maybe it might be the opposite of that, but not that one. Okay, 5 minus 6 is -1, it's not that. Okay, not that one or that one. Okay, we have -3 plus 10, and that is going to give us +7. So let's hold on to that one and then check our last one. -5 plus 6, that's +1. So it does end up being this -3 and 10. Okay, so that is what we're going to use on this next part. Okay, so what we're going to do now, and I'm going to make a little note right here, is put that factor set into the middle equation as x terms. Okay, so that's what we're going to do right here. So we're just going to write our equation, but replace that 7x in the middle. And I'll show you what I mean by that. We have 6x squared first. Okay, then we have that instead of the 7x, we're going to have -3x and then plus 10x. So you see that we had that -3 and the 10, and we just made those x terms and put them in the middle. And then we have the -5 at the end. Okay. All right, so we have that rewritten now. So now what we're going to do is just make these two separate binomials. So all you have to do for that is group them just with parentheses. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite mine, but you don't have to. You can just add your parentheses to be like this. Okay. And we got to put that plus sign in the middle because we're adding all these terms and subtracting them. We're not multiplying anything yet. Okay, so now what we're going to do, we have these kind of simplified down to be binomials, is we're going to factor these binomials. So take whatever out of them that we can. So look at this first one on the left, 6x squared minus 3x. We can take an x out of both of those terms. And we can also take a 3 out of both of those terms, a +3, right? So if I take 3x out, what will I be left with? So 6 divided by 3 is going to be 2, and then we still have another x left there. And then instead of the 3x, we're just going to have a 1. Okay? All right, and then we had our plus in the middle. All right, and then we're going to try to factor that 10x minus 5. So they both, one has a variable and one doesn't, so we can't take a variable out. But we can take 5, a +5 out of both of those. So first one, 10 divided by 5 would be 2. And we solve the x, and then -1. Okay. All right, so now look at what we have left. Do you see anything that looks similar about each other in that last set that we have? Yeah, right, we have that 2x minus 1 twice. Okay, so what we're going to do now is called grouping. So we're going to group what we have left. Okay, so that 2x minus 1, we're just going to have that once. So let me make some room. I'm going to erase these top factors right here. Okay, and I'm going to keep my work going up here at the top. So first we're going to have that 2x plus 1 or minus 1. Okay, and then the other thing we're going to group is those things that we factored out of the binomials. So that 3x and the +5, that's going to become its own binomial next to that. Okay, so that's what we call grouping. We're grouping those terms together. Okay, so that is our final answer. Okay, so I'm going to box that in. And again, if we wanted to check it, if you want to check any of these, and especially when you're going and doing these on your own later, if you want to check them, how we do that is multiplying them together, right? So you could definitely do that if you're not sure, right? So make sure you have that written down. We're going to move on to the last method, okay? All right, so now we're looking at the next method for factoring a trinomial with a leading coefficient other than 1. So this is the bottoms up method, okay? And you can see that we have the same exact problem as the last one. So we should get the same answer. We're just trying out this different method on it, so that way you can see whatever method you use, you're going to get the same answer if it's the same polynomial, okay? All right, so the first thing we're going to do for bottoms up is we're going to take that leading coefficient, which is 6 on this one, and multiply it by the last term. So that is 6 times -5, just like the last one. Okay, so now we're going to rewrite this, and it's kind of like we're moving that 6 to multiply that -5 to the back. So now when we rewrite this, we're just going to write x squared. That 6 is gone, okay? And then plus 7x. And then that -30 that we got from multiplying 6 times -5 is going to now be our last term in the trinomial, so -30. Okay. All right, so basically we've simplified this trinomial down to be a trinomial with a leading coefficient of 1. So we can factor this with the method that we learned to do that a second ago. So remember, all we have to do for that is find the factors for that last term and then see which of those sets adds to be the middle coefficient, which is +7 here. So I'll go ahead and write down, because we've kind of done this a couple times, so you can already see that the factors we're going to use, it's going to be 10 and -3, okay? That is a factor set from -30, and that adds to be +7. So that is a set that we're going to use. So when we use this method on the other one, all we have to do now is write our binomials. So we have an x in each one, and then we have +10 in the first one and -3 in the second one. Okay, so that is that first trinomial, this trinomial solved or factored. Okay, now we have to think about, that wasn't our original trinomial, so what do we need to do next? Next, we're going to take that 6 that kind of disappeared in the beginning and divide it into the second terms in each of those binomials. Okay, so we're going to divide 6 into 10, and we're going to divide 6 into 3. Okay, so and you may notice that that becomes fractions 10/6 and 3/6. So we can reduce those fractions. So let's go ahead and do that. Remember, when we say reduce the fraction, that means finding that greatest common factor of those two terms. So 10/6, that can become, let's see, we can divide 2 into both of those. So that's going to be 5/3. Okay. Now what about the next term? So that's going to become 1/2, because we can divide 3 into both of those. That is the fractions we have now. Okay. So now it looks really simplified. Okay. But we're not done yet. The last thing we're going to do is where the term bottoms up essentially comes from. So what we're going to do is take those denominators we have, 3 and 2, and we're going to bottoms up them and move them to the front of our binomial. So essentially what we're doing is multiplying each of those binomials by that number. So we're multiplying this one by 3, and we're multiplying this one by 2, okay? So if we multiply that first one by 3, that becomes 3x plus, and then those 3's cancel out for the 3 and the 5/3, so we're just left with 5. And then if we multiply the second binomial by 2, we get 2x, and then the 2's cancel out with that fraction, so -1. Okay, and that is our original trinomial factored. So you'll see that this is the same answer from using the gross product method, right? So it's the same way. We're just using a different method. And again, you can check it if you want to see if that did work out. You just have to multiply those two binomials together. But we're not going to do that right now. You can do it if you want. All right, so once you have your notes completed, go ahead and get started on the factoring trinomials worksheet. I think there's 4 problems on there. So use your notes and decide which method you need to use on which problem. Okay, remember to take a picture and email it to Ms. Riddell to get credit for that worksheet. And then your exit ticket is a Google Slides, and it's on the Schoology page. So complete that when you're finished with everything, and I'll see you later.